I heard my son say I wouldn't come back. His voice was calm, almost casual, like he was discussing the weather, not my life. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My own child, the boy I raised alone after losing everything, planning my disappearance. That betrayal lit a fire in me I never thought I had. My name is Lucinda Hartley, and before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I always like to know who's on the other side of the story. Maybe you're in your kitchen or lying in bed with your headphones in. Either way, settle in. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when a mother decides she's not the fool her son believes she is. It started 3 weeks before my 71st birthday. My son, Ethan, had been distant for months. Calls shortened, texts delayed, visits canceled. He blamed work, said business was taking off, that he was swamped. I wanted to believe him. After all, I'd spent most of my life believing in him. When he finally showed up on a sunny Friday afternoon, bouquet in hand and that slick city smile on his face, I thought maybe things were turning around. "Mom," he said, kneeling beside my garden chair, "you need a break. You've been cooped up in this house for too long. I booked you something special." He handed me a glossy envelope. Inside was a ticket for a 2-week cruise through the Mediterranean. Rome, Santorini, Lisbon. The kind of trip I used to dream about when I was younger. At first, my heart leapt. The ocean, the stars, the freedom. Then, as I looked at Ethan's perfectly rehearsed grin, something inside me tightened. "You planned this?" I asked softly. He nodded. "You deserve it, Mom. You raised me alone. Now it's time you live a little." Sweet words. Too sweet. Ethan was never one for sentiment unless there was something he needed. But I smiled, thanked him, and convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, this was his way of making amends. The night before I was to leave, Ethan stayed over to help me pack. I made tea while he scrolled through his phone, barely looking up. Around midnight, I heard him on a call in the hallway, his voice hushed but urgent. "She's leaving tomorrow. Everything's arranged. Don't worry, she won't come back." I froze. Every sound in the house suddenly magnified, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, my own pulse thrumming in my ears. She won't come back. At first, I thought I'd misheard. Maybe he meant something else. Maybe, no, there was no mistaking the cold precision in his tone. I edged closer, heart pounding. "Yes, the paperwork's in place," he continued. "Once it's done, the transfer will go through. Just keep it quiet until then." He hung up before I could move. I slipped back into the kitchen, my hands trembling as I stared at the cooling tea. The house suddenly felt foreign, filled with shadows that no longer belonged to me. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, to shake him and ask why. But instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stayed silent and thought. I remembered the way he'd convinced me to put my home in his name for tax benefits. The way he'd persuaded me to sell some of my late husband's collectibles because they were taking up space. The way his eyes had grown colder, calculating whenever money came up. And then I understood. If I was gone, really gone, everything would be his. The house, the savings, the insurance policy I'd never canceled. My sweet boy had found a quicker way to inherit. I stood in front of the window, looking out at the moonlit yard. Anger and grief wrestled inside me, but something else emerged too. A strange, steady calm. I whispered to my reflection, "So this is your plan, Ethan? All right then. Let's play your game." By morning, my decision was made. I packed my favorite linen dress, my late husband's silver cross, and the little notebook where I'd once written love poems. But this time, the pages would hold something else. Evidence, notes, every strange thing I saw or heard. When Ethan came to drive me to the port, he seemed lighter, almost cheerful. "You're gonna love it, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "Don't worry about a thing." I smiled, meeting his eyes. Oh, I won't, not a single thing. As I boarded the ship, the ocean wind brushed against my face, sharp and cold. I turned back once, watching my son grow smaller on the dock. He waved, smiling. I waved back, matching it perfectly. Inside, my heart whispered, "You'll regret this 3 times over, my son." The horn sounded. The ship began to move, and just like that, the game began. The sea has a way of pretending to be gentle. It ripples and shimmers, whispering lullabies that almost make you forget it can swallow whole worlds. As the ship pulled farther from shore, I stood on the deck and thought, this is exactly what betrayal feels like. Beautiful, endless, and dangerous beneath the surface. For the first 2 days, I tried to be what Ethan expected, the naive, grateful mother dazzled by her good fortune. I wore my sun hat, attended the captain's welcome dinner, and smiled when people asked if I was traveling alone. Yes, I said, but not lonely. It wasn't entirely true. There was a hollow space in my chest, something between disbelief and mourning. But fear? No. Fear had burned away the night I overheard my son's voice. What remained was something sharper. The ship was magnificent. 5 restaurants, 3 pools, glittering chandeliers that swayed gently as if breathing with the waves. The kind of place meant for laughter and luxury. But I noticed things most guests didn't. The flicker of security cameras that seemed to linger on me too long. The man in the navy blazer who always happened to be reading near wherever I sat. The steward who knocked on my door by mistake twice in one night. On the 3rd evening, I met Martin and Joanne, an older couple from London celebrating their 50th anniversary. They were warm and full of stories, the kind of people who saw others deeply. Joanne squeezed my hand as we watched the sunset over the railing. "You have a kind face," she said softly, "but your eyes look like they're waiting for something bad to happen." I forced a small laugh. "I suppose I've learned to expect surprises." Martin chuckled. "That's life for you. It always sneaks up from behind." That night, after dinner, I returned to my cabin to find the door slightly open. My stomach dropped. I knew I'd locked it. Inside, the curtains fluttered from an open window, and one of my suitcases was unzipped. Nothing seemed missing, yet the message was clear. Someone wanted me to know they'd been there. I shut the door, heart pounding but mind steady. "All right," I whispered. "If this is the game, I'll learn the rules." The next morning, I requested to move cabins. The desk clerk, a young man with gentle brown eyes and a name tag that read Leo, listened carefully. "Was there a disturbance, ma'am?" "Nothing I can prove," I replied. "Just a feeling." He leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes feelings are worth trusting." There was something sincere about him, something that made me lower my guard, if only a little. He found me a different room near the middle deck, smaller but quieter. When I thanked him, he smiled. "Let me know if you need anything else, Mrs. Hartley. People should feel safe on this ship." That night, I wrote my first entry in the notebook I had brought. Day 3. Someone entered my room. Nothing taken. Message left in silence. Must stay alert. Trust no one. Not even those who seem kind. Around midnight, I heard a faint rustle outside my door. I waited, listening. A shadow moved under the crack, then the soft slide of paper against carpet. When I opened the door, no one was there. An envelope lay on the floor. No name, no handwriting. Just the faint scent of cologne. Inside, a single piece of paper with printed words. "Enjoy the view while it lasts." My hands trembled slightly as I folded the note back. The message wasn't poetic. It was a warning. The next morning, I sat by the deck cafe, sipping bitter coffee and pretending to read. The man in the navy blazer reappeared 2 tables away. He wasn't reading today, just staring over the rim of his cup, expression blank. I met his gaze once, long enough to make it clear that I saw him. He looked away first. Leo passed by then, carrying a tray. "Everything all right, Mrs. Hartley?" he asked, noticing my clenched hands. I smiled faintly. "Everything's fine, just learning to enjoy the view." He nodded but didn't quite believe me. "If anything seems off, you let me know. We take safety seriously here." When he left, I turned toward the horizon. The sea glimmered under the morning sun, innocent and endless. Somewhere beneath that calm, I could feel the current shifting, dark, deliberate, and waiting. I closed my eyes and whispered into the wind, "You'll regret this 3 times over, my son. And this is only the beginning." The ship sailed on, slicing through blue water like a blade, and with every mile I grew more certain that whatever Ethan had planned for me, he had underestimated the wrong woman. On the 5th morning, the sky had turned the color of tarnished silver. The calm days of glittering sunlight were gone, replaced by a quiet that pressed against the walls. I woke up uneasy, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off, took a walk on the upper deck, watched gulls glide behind us, tried to convince myself I was safe. But my instincts whispered otherwise. Every corridor seemed to have eyes. Even the polished brass railings reflected more than my face. They reflected danger. After breakfast, Leo found me again. He wasn't carrying a tray this time. His uniform jacket hung open, his expression uncertain. "Mrs. Hartley," he said softly, "could I have a word, somewhere private?" Something in his voice, half fear, half urgency, made me nod. We slipped into a quiet corner near the service stairwell, where the hum of the ship muffled our words. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," he began, glancing around, "but I overheard something last night." My stomach tightened. "Go on." He swallowed. 2 men from the security staff were talking near the storage deck. One of them said, "We'll handle the old lady before docking." The other mentioned an insurance claim. They didn't say your name, but... I didn't let him finish. "But you think they meant me?" He hesitated. "I can't be sure, but I've seen how they watch you. And there's something else. You're not on the ship's main passenger manifest." I froze. "What?" "I checked the roster this morning. Your cabin is listed as vacant. That's not a clerical error. Someone's erased your presence on purpose." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The sea's rhythm outside seemed to fade beneath the pounding in my chest. He looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and guilt. "Do you have anyone who'd want to hurt you?" "Yes," I said softly. "My son." Leo's eyes widened, but he didn't question me. He simply nodded, as though he'd already suspected it. We sat in silence for a moment, the ship creaking around us. Then I said, "Tell me what you know about those men." "They work under the ship's private contractor, hired security. I think someone paid them off, but I don't know who. I only overheard parts of it." "And why are you telling me this?" I asked carefully. He looked down at his shoes. "Because I didn't sign up for this. I just served drinks. But something's off here, and I don't want your blood on my conscience." I studied him. He seemed sincere, but sincerity is the first mask a liar wears. "Leo," I said slowly, "if you're being honest, then help me find proof. If you're not, then you better tell whoever sent you that I'm not as easy to get rid of as they think." He nodded, almost grateful for my mistrust. "There's a maintenance deck below the passenger quarters, restricted access. That's where they keep private files and logs. I can get us in tonight." That night, I barely touched my dinner. Martin and Joanne noticed my distraction, but I simply told them I wasn't feeling well. Joanne squeezed my hand again. "If you need us, dear, you know where to find us." Their kindness warmed me more than I expected. It reminded me of all the years I'd spent alone after my husband passed, the loneliness that had driven me to live for Ethan's approval. And now, that same love had become my undoing. By midnight, I met Leo in the narrow corridor outside the laundry room. The air was damp and smelled faintly of bleach. He led me down an unmarked stairwell to the lower deck. My heart raced. Not from fear, but from the thrill of taking control. Inside the maintenance room, the hum of machines filled the space. Leo found a small terminal glowing in the dark. "Here," he whispered, typing quickly. "Passenger records." He paused, frowning. "Look, your name's gone. Completely wiped, but there's a note under cabin 313. Client coverage approved, claim active." I felt the blood drain from my face. Claim, that word. Again. Insurance. "What kind of claim?" I asked. "Travel insurance, but it's filed under a corporate name. EH Holdings. EH. Ethan Hartley. My son's initials." It all snapped into focus. The cruise wasn't a gift, it was a transaction. He'd arranged the trip through his company, insured my journey, and planned to profit from my disappearance. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "Thank you, Leo," I whispered. "You've done enough." But as I turned to leave, I noticed something in his eyes. Nervous, darting. "Leo," I said quietly, "who are you really working for?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" I stepped closer. "You found me. You knew where to look. You knew too much. And you just happened to have access to restricted decks?" He didn't answer. His silence said more than words ever could. I felt my heartbeat steady. "If you're lying to me, Leo, you'd better pray the truth finds you first." Without another word, I left the maintenance deck and locked my cabin door. Then in my notebook, I wrote, "Day 5. The truth is leaking through the cracks. My name erased. Insurance filed. Leo, friend or foe. The game deepens." As I set the pen down, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't see a fragile old woman. I saw a storm gathering. Somewhere out there, Ethan slept soundly, believing his mother was drifting toward her end. He had no idea I was already rewriting the story. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of knocking. Sharp, deliberate, and wrong. It wasn't room service, not at that hour. I waited, holding my breath. When I opened the door a crack, no one was there. Just a folded napkin on the floor. Inside, written in rushed handwriting. "Don't trust him. Meet me on the observation deck at sunset." The L could only mean Leo, but the message didn't feel like his voice. Something about it was off. The handwriting looked forced, the ink smudged as if written by someone trying to imitate another. Still, I went. At sunset, the ocean bled into gold and the air tasted of salt and static. The observation deck was nearly empty except for one figure leaning against the railing. Leo. His uniform jacket was gone, replaced by a dark sweater. His face looked paler, harder. "You got my note," he said quietly. "Did I?" I replied. "It didn't look like your handwriting." He hesitated, then looked away. I had to write quickly. I didn't want anyone to see. I stepped closer. "Who's anyone?" His jaw tightened. "Mrs. Hartley, there's something you need to know. I haven't been honest with you." "Not entirely." I folded my arms. "I figured." He met my gaze then, his eyes full of guilt. "Ethan hired me months ago. I was supposed to make sure you boarded the cruise. Stayed calm, followed instructions. I wasn't told why, just that it was for your safety." "Safety?" I scoffed. "He's arranging my death, not my safety." Leo's face crumpled. I didn't know that at first. But I started putting things together. The erased records, the insurance. Then I overheard the security detail talking about how accidents happen at sea. That's when I realized what I was part of. The sea wind whipped around us, catching the edge of my shawl. I held his gaze for a long time. "So what now?" "I want to help you," he said. "I can get you access to the ship's control logs, proof of what they're planning. But we have to be careful. They're watching both of us." His voice trembled slightly. Whether from fear or remorse, I couldn't tell. Before I could answer, the ship's intercom crackled. "Attention passengers. Please remain in your cabins. We'll be conducting a safety drill shortly." Leo frowned. "That's not scheduled." Every hair on my arm stood on end. "What kind of drill?" He didn't answer, just grabbed my arm. "Come with me." We hurried down the corridor as alarms began to echo, muffled and mechanical. Crew members moved briskly, their faces unreadable. The lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed. He led me into a narrow maintenance hall. "They're covering something," he said. "The drill is an excuse to isolate the decks. If they can't push you overboard quietly, they'll do it during the chaos." I stared at him. "And what happens to you if you're caught helping me?" He gave a tired half smile. I stopped thinking about that when I realized I was helping a murderer's mother. For a moment I believed him, truly. There was a tremor in his voice that sounded human, not rehearsed. Then, a clang from above, footsteps echoing down the metal stairs. 2 men in security vests appeared, flashlights cutting through the dark. Leo's grip tightened. "Run!" We darted into a storage bay, weaving between crates. The air smelled of oil and salt. I crouched behind a container, heart hammering as beams of light swept the room. "Deck's clear," one voice called. "She's not here." The other replied. "Boss says if she's not gone by morning, we make sure she is." Their voices faded. I exhaled, shaking. Leo pressed a finger to his lips. After several tense minutes, we slipped out through a side hatch, emerging onto a rain-slicked deck. The sky had turned black, lightning flashing in the distance. The ocean roared like it knew our secret. Leo turned to me. "I'll get the proof," he said. "Stay in your cabin tonight. Don't open the door for anyone." "Where will you go?" "To the communications room. If I can send a message to the mainland, we might have a chance." Before I could stop him, he vanished into the storm. I returned to my cabin, drenched and trembling. Hours passed, the drill ended, and silence swallowed the corridors again. Sometime past midnight, a loudspeaker crackled to life briefly, just static and a burst of garbled words. Then faintly, I heard it. "She knows. End it tonight." The next morning, Leo didn't show up for work. His nameplate was gone from the staff board. When I asked about him, the purser frowned and said, "We have no one by that name." Later that afternoon, I found his uniform jacket near the deck rail, soaked and torn as if it had been ripped from his body. I stood there, clutching the fabric against my chest as the wind howled. "One regret, Ethan," I whispered. "That's one." Then I turned toward the horizon, where thunder rolled like distant applause. The web was tightening, but so was my resolve. I wasn't done playing, not yet. The sea can turn cruel without warning. One moment it hums with lullabies, the next it roars with hunger. By dawn, the storm that had been grumbling on the horizon tore itself open above us, slashing rain and rage across the decks. I stood by my cabin window, watching lightning carve the sky, and I knew this was no ordinary weather. Someone was making their move. I dressed quickly, slipped Leo's soaked jacket into my bag, and tucked my notebook close to my chest. My reflection in the glass looked foreign, hair wild, eyes bright with something close to defiance. I no longer looked like the woman who had boarded this ship trembling with doubt. At 6:17 a.m., the first alarm blared. The captain's voice, distorted and uneven, echoed through the speakers. "Attention passengers, please remain calm. We're experiencing minor engine issues due to the weather." But the way the ship shuddered beneath my feet said otherwise. The corridor lights flickered, then died completely. People screamed down the hall. Metal groaned. The floor tilted. I stumbled toward the door just as the emergency lights flickered to life, casting everything in red. That's when I saw them. 2 men in security uniforms sprinting past my cabin, radios crackling. One of them said, "Check 312 and 313 first." My cabin was 313. They weren't fixing the ship, they were finishing the job. I waited until their footsteps faded, then slipped into the service stairwell. The air down there was thick with oil and panic. Crew members shouted over one another, trying to restore power. I moved through the shadows, keeping low, heart pounding. Then I saw it. The communications room door left slightly ajar. Inside, screens glowed faintly in backup power mode. Leo's voice echoed in my head. "If I can send a message to the mainland." I entered, closing the door behind me. The console was damaged, but one small terminal still blinked, waiting for input. I wasn't much with technology, but I'd spent years keeping my late husband's records. Numbers, codes, passwords. I typed Ethan's company initials, EHH, followed by the date of the cruise. The terminal opened a hidden folder titled Travel Assets. Inside were insurance files, invoices, and something worse, a letter of authorization. Ethan's digital signature stared back at me above a note. Beneficiary Ethan Hartley. Policyholder Lucinda Hartley. Status: pending confirmation of fatality. There it was. My death, pre-written in pixels. My throat went dry, but I pressed send on the ship's distress channel. The screen flashed. Signal transmitting. A voice outside shouted, "Someone's in there!" I grabbed the nearest object, a wrench, and ducked behind the console as the door burst open. The man in the navy blazer from the deck cafe stormed in, eyes sharp, gun drawn. "Mrs. Hartley," he said almost politely, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I replied, steady despite the fear crawling under my skin. He gestured with the weapon. "You've caused quite the problem. The policy was supposed to close quietly. Now you've complicated things." "Tell Ethan," I said. "He should have chosen better company." The ship lurched violently, throwing him off balance. I swung the wrench, striking his arm. The gun clattered to the floor. He lunged, grabbing my wrist, but I twisted free and slammed the wrench against the control panel. Sparks erupted, filling the room with smoke. I bolted for the hallway. The lights died completely. Only the storm illuminated the narrow corridors as lightning flashed through the portholes. I ran, heart hammering, clutching Leo's ID badge like a talisman. At the stairwell, another alarm wailed, a deep, guttural sound that meant evacuation. Over the intercom, a mechanical voice droned, "Abandoned ship, abandoned ship." Crew members rushed past me toward the lifeboats. The deck tilted further as waves slammed against the hull. I pushed through the chaos until I reached the upper level, rain cutting into my skin like shards of glass. "Mrs. Hartley!" a voice shouted. It was Martin, drenched and frantic, waving from the lifeboat line. "Over here!" I ran to him, gasping, clutching his hand as the deck buckled beneath us. Joanne helped pull me into their boat just as the final siren wailed. The ship loomed behind us, lights flickering, bow sinking into black water. As we drifted away, I looked back at it, not with fear, but with grim satisfaction, because I knew something the others didn't. That distress signal I sent, it wasn't just a call for help. I'd attached Ethan's digital files to it, all the insurance documents, every name, every signature. The Coast Guard would receive it within minutes. My son's perfect scheme was sinking faster than this ship. When the rescue chopper appeared through the rain, I whispered into the wind, "That's two, Ethan. 2 regrets." Martin turned to me, confused. "What did you say?" I smiled faintly. "Just something I promised my son." As the helicopter's spotlight cut through the dark, I clutched my notebook against my heart. I had proof. I had witnesses. And more importantly, I had survived the story meant to end me. Somewhere, on dry land, Ethan would soon receive news that his mother's ship had gone down. He'd smile, maybe pour himself a drink, thinking his problem was gone. He had no idea the real storm was already on its way. They say survivors always carry the sea in their bones, its rhythm, its weight, its silence. By the time I stepped off the rescue helicopter onto solid ground, I felt every heartbeat echo like a wave. The officials swarmed us. Blankets, questions, cameras. They told us the Eden's Promise had sunk, that most passengers were safe, that a few were missing. And among the missing was me. "Mrs. Hartley," a young officer said softly, "your son has been notified. He believes you didn't make it." I almost laughed at the irony. "Let's keep it that way," I said. He blinked. "Ma'am? I'll explain later. For now, I need to disappear. For a few days." He nodded, perhaps recognizing something fierce and unyielding in my tone. Within hours, with help from the Coast Guard liaison, I was placed in a quiet medical lodge along the shore, off the record. Joanne and Martin promised to keep my secret. For 2 days, I rested, listening to the news report my death in soft, pitying tones. Lucinda Hartley, 63, presumed lost at sea after the Eden's Promise sank off the Florida coast. Each word was a strange sort of gift. My son had the closure he thought he wanted, and I had the element of surprise. On the 3rd morning, the sun poured gold over the horizon, and I knew it was time. I slipped into a simple cream dress, the same one I'd packed for the cruise's formal night. The irony made me smile. A borrowed car took me back to my town, a place that suddenly looked smaller than I remembered. My home, a white colonial with ivy crawling over its porch, sat peaceful as if untouched by betrayal. But in the driveway were cars I didn't recognize. The front lawn was covered in folding chairs, flowers, and a banner that read, "Celebrating the life of Lucinda Hartley." There it was, my own memorial. Through the open windows came the sound of people crying softly, a pastor speaking gently about a woman of kindness, grace, and strength. I walked closer, heart pounding until I could see inside. And Ethan stood at the front, black suit, somber face. His wife Claire dabbed her eyes with a tissue. But when the pastor paused, I saw Ethan's lips twitch. Not in grief, but in something dangerously close to relief. He cleared his throat and said, "My mother, she loved the ocean. I guess it's fitting that she found peace there." Peace. That was when I decided I couldn't wait another second. The back doors of the hall creaked as I stepped inside. The whispers started before anyone truly saw me. Then the gasps. The collective intake of breath, and finally, Ethan's face draining of color as if the ghost he thought he'd buried had just walked in. I stood there, calm as still water. "You guessed wrong, darling," I said softly. "The ocean didn't want me." The room fell silent. Chairs scraped. Someone cried out, "She's alive!" A woman dropped her coffee cup. Ethan stumbled forward. "Mom, it's impossible. They said—" "I know what they said," I interrupted, my gaze locked on his. "And I know what you said before I left. She won't come back, wasn't it?" He froze. The crowd murmured. "Maybe," I continued, "you thought the sea would finish what you couldn't." "Mom, please," he said quickly, trying to regain composure. "You're confused. You were hurt. Maybe the trauma." "Enough." My voice cracked like a whip. "I know everything, the policy, the forged documents, the payments funneled through your company's offshore account." From my bag, I pulled out a small folder, water-stained but intact. "I sent these files before the ship went down. The Coast Guard, the insurance board, the authorities, they all have copies." Gasps rippled through the hall. Ethan looked around desperately, as though someone might come to his rescue, but all he found were eyes turning on him, friends, colleagues, neighbors. "I loved you," I said quietly. "Every sleepless night, every worry, every sacrifice was for you." I took a shaky breath. "And you repaid me by trying to erase me." He stepped toward me, whispering, "Mom, please, not here." "Oh, I think here is perfect," I said. "You tried to give me a funeral. Let's finish it properly." I turned to the pastor, voice trembling but steady. "Would you mind saying a prayer for my son? He's lost something precious, his soul." No one spoke. Claire began crying silently, head in her hands. Ethan backed away, his mask cracking, eyes glassy with something like fear or regret. Two police officers entered quietly from the side doors. One of them held a folder. "Ethan Hartley?" He didn't resist, just bowed his head, murmuring, "I never meant," before they led him away. As the doors closed behind him, the air in the room shifted, sad, heavy, but strangely peaceful. I stood still, feeling the first true breath of freedom fill my chest. Someone whispered, "You're incredible." I shook my head. "No, just alive." I stepped outside into the sunlight. The wind carried the scent of salt and rain, and for the first time in years, I felt unburdened. I walked slowly down the path, past the rows of lilies meant for my grave. Life had tried to bury me twice, once in grief, once in betrayal, but I wasn't meant for burial. I was meant for rebirth. After the memorial, my town felt smaller, quieter. Every street held an echo, every face a question they were too polite to ask. Some whispered admiration, others pity, but none of it mattered. I had survived something that was supposed to end me, and now came the hardest part, learning how to live again. Ethan's arrest was the headline for weeks. The story twisted and turned. Local businessman arrested in insurance fraud case involving mother's alleged death at sea. The prosecutors called it a crime of desperation. The neighbors called it unthinkable. But I called it what it was: betrayal, wrapped in calculation, born from greed. Still, I didn't hate my son. No, hate was far too small a word for what I felt. What lived inside me was something more complex, a blend of grief, disbelief, and a deep ache for the boy he used to be. A month later, I returned to the sea. Not the same ship, of course. This was a small pier cafe overlooking calm water, a place where fishermen greeted the dawn with laughter. I ordered tea, the same kind I'd shared with Leo that first day on the Eden's Promise. When the waitress brought my cup, she smiled. "You're the lady from the news, aren't you? The one who survived the shipwreck?" I smiled faintly. "I suppose I am." She hesitated. "If you don't mind me asking, how do you go back to normal after something like that?" I looked out at the water, soft, endless, deceptively gentle. "You don't," I said. "You build a new normal from what's left." She nodded thoughtfully and left me to my silence. Later that week, I visited the detention center. I told myself I was going for closure, but part of me still needed to understand. How far had Ethan fallen? And why hadn't I seen it sooner? When they brought him into the visiting room, he looked smaller. The sharp confidence that used to fill his frame was gone, replaced by something hollow. His eyes met mine, and for a moment we were just mother and son again before all the rot set in. "Mom," he said quietly, sitting across from me, "you look alive." "I am," I said softly, "thanks to you." He flinched at that, and I saw a crack of guilt flash across his face. "I didn't mean for it to happen that way," he began. "I was drowning in debt. I thought if the policy—" I raised my hand gently. "Stop. Don't explain what I already know. You wanted relief. You thought money would fix what time and choices couldn't. I understand desperation, Ethan. I just never thought it would turn you into a stranger." He looked down at his hands. "You have every right to hate me." "I don't," I whispered. "I can't. You were my child long before you were my mistake." Tears welled in his eyes. "They said I might get 5 years, maybe more." "I know." I stood, smoothing my jacket. "Use them wisely." He stared at me, voice breaking. "You're not coming back, are you?" "I already did," I said gently. "But not for you. To free myself." As the guard led him away, he turned once, eyes pleading. I watched until the door closed behind him. The sound echoed through the room like a final punctuation mark, an ending I hadn't asked for, but one I finally accepted. That evening, I went home to my quiet house. The lilies from my funeral had wilted in their vases, petals scattered like forgotten prayers. I picked one up, pressed it between the pages of my notebook, and began to write. Not about betrayal this time, but about rebirth. About how life can start again even after it's been stolen from you. I learned that survival isn't just about breathing. It's about reclaiming the air they tried to take from you. I closed the notebook and smiled. The next morning, I planted a small tree in the backyard. A magnolia, just like the one Ethan used to climb when he was 5. The soil was cool, the roots delicate, the promise small but certain. As I pressed the earth down with my palms, I whispered, "This is for both of us, for who you were and who I'm still becoming." The wind rustled softly, and for a moment I could almost hear the sea again, its endless rhythm, not threatening this time, but forgiving. 3 regrets I'd once promised him. The first was underestimating me. The second was the life he destroyed to gain what he couldn't keep. And the third, the one that would haunt him longest, was realizing that even after everything, I'd still chosen peace over vengeance. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't rage, its survival grace, and the quiet power of walking away whole. I brushed the dirt from my hands, stood tall, and looked toward the horizon. The sun was rising, brighter than before, and for the first time in years, so was I.